All right, we've got to get to Joe Walsh. Not Joe Walsh from the Eagles. I did post something earlier. I shared out a video of Joe Walsh commenting on the 2016 election. Joe Walsh from the Eagles. And I said, breaking news, it's all been an elaborate practical joke. It's actually Joe Walsh from the Eagles who is challenging Trump. Because I'm just hilarious. But no, that was a joke. It actually is former Congressman Joe Walsh who is running. I was kidding about it all being a joke. No, it's quite serious. Now, Congressman Joe Walsh. Well, so let me start here. So I said something earlier on Facebook about if I had to choose, and this may surprise some of you, but if I had to choose, as much as I am critical of Trump, if I had to choose between he and Joe Walsh, I might actually choose Trump. But what's funny is, and I'll tell you the reason in a moment, but what's funny about the reason why Joe Walsh, for one very specific reason though, and honestly, on balance in the totality of things, Joe Walsh is probably a much more competent person in virtually every way. There's one very, very specific reason though, where I prefer Trump, just in terms of policy position. And it's a reason that isn't discussed very much, but it's actually extraordinarily important. But what's funny is, the particular reason that I have in mind, some of you who are very ardent Trump supporters might actually be more apt, ironically enough, to agree with Joe Walsh than on Trump on the particular issue where I'm actually more apt, much more so, to agree with Trump. So much so, I would actually prefer Trump to Joe Walsh. Now, before we get to that, for those of you who are not familiar with Joe Walsh, so Joe Walsh, remember the Tea Party Republicans? You know, that was their sort of response, the Republican Party's response in the macro to Obama was the Tea Partiers. And the Tea Party Republicans are, I mean, they're not really around anymore. They sort of, the whole thing sort of morphed into what is now known as the House Freedom Caucus, which is, I guess, sort of Tea Party light. Now, the Tea Party Republicans, so they really rose to power during the midterms, during the first term of the Obama administration. And they are, in my opinion, and Joe Walsh is one of these guys, I've always said Tea Party Republicans are extraordinarily dangerous to the country for one very specific reason, for one very specific policy position that they have. And that position is the debt ceiling or the debt limit or the spending limit, whatever you want to call it. It goes by a few different terms. I usually call it the debt ceiling. And if you're a longtime listener of the show, you've probably heard me explain before what this is and why it's so important, because a lot of people misunderstand it. So realizing that some of you have probably already heard me talk about it and you don't want to hear the whole rant again, I will try to be very brief with it. But the debt limit is not the same as the budget. So the federal budget is what the government is spending, just like in your household, just like your personal budget, whatever. Whatever is your budget, that's what you're planning to spend, right? That's what you have to spend for your bills and expenses in life. The spending limit is not the same as the budget, and this is what so many people don't understand. The spending limit or the debt limit, the debt ceiling, allows the government to continue to borrow money or to print money in order to service the debt, to pay the interest on the existing debt. If you believe, as a Tea Party Republican does, as probably all Republicans do, as probably even many Democrats probably do, if you believe that the federal government spends too much money, the correct remedy for that is to get the federal government to spend less money. In other words, lower the federal budget. cut back on spending. Again, I'm just speaking in a vacuum here. We're not going to talk about, healthcare proposals and all. I'm not making any judgments about whether we should or should not spend more on this or that or anything. I'm just saying, just in the micro here, that's how you lower spending. You lower the budget. What you don't do ever is say, we're not going to raise the debt limit. We're actually going to allow the federal government to default on our debt. That's what you don't do. Because the United States federal government has never in our history gone into default. We have never defaulted on our debt. And we must not. So in order to not default, we have to raise the spending limit. It used to be a perfectly routine thing. People credit, I don't know why, some people credit or used to credit when people cared about Reagan. Now Republicans love Trump so much, it's almost like they've forgotten about Reagan, the patron saint of conservatism. But people used to credit Reagan for his fiscal, quote, conservatism, quote unquote, probably because he wanted to, he was always looking to cut Social Security and things like that. But he was willing to spend so much money on defense in trying to bankrupt the Soviet Union and so forth. And, we can have a separate conversation about that. But even Reagan used to say, look, well, obviously, the debt limit, that's a no-brainer. You have to continue to raise it because the country can never be allowed to default. I don't remember until 2011 the debt limit ever being a bargaining chip where Republicans and Mitch McConnell, it started with him, which is funny because later he tried to undo what he had unleashed in a way. But it started with him. He said during negotiations with Obama over the budget, the debt ceiling might very well be a hostage worth taking. His exact words. All of a sudden, the debt limit was on the table as a negotiating tool, meaning that it was possible, meaning that we were actually flirting with that disaster for the first time of actually defaulting. Again, if you want to cut spending, you cut the budget. You don't risk going into default. And here's why. Look, economics is not an exact science. It's economic theory. And it's theory for a reason. And there are many different economic theories. You've got your basic, on the left, your Keynesian style economics, and on your right, your supply side economics and whatnot. You'll often hear libertarians talk about Austrian economics. I'm not an economist. I just know the very basics. So I'll admit I can get in over my head pretty quick on this stuff myself. But virtually any economist will tell you that if the federal government is ever allowed to go into default, that will trigger something truly economically, globally cataclysmic that would probably make the Great Depression look like the Roaring '20s. The global economy will go over a cliff from which we might not recover in our lifetimes if the federal government actually defaults for the first time in our country's history on the full faith and credit of the federal government. So it cannot be allowed to ever happen. It's global economic Armageddon. Think of it this way, and this is the best analogy I've ever been able to come up with. Imagine, take one of your bills, like take your electric bill. Let's say you decide your electric bill is too high. You're just spending too much on electricity. What do you do about that? You got to cut down your use of electricity, maybe be more diligent about turning off lights or, putting things on a timer, whatever it is, right? You find ways to cut down on the electricity that you're using to reduce your bill. Here's what you don't do. You don't say, you know what? We're spending too much on electricity. Our electric bill's too high. So you know what I think we'll do? We're just not going to pay the bill anymore. We'll just default on the electric bill. We're spending too much. We're not going to spend anymore. Problem solved. That's what you don't do. Why? Because you're going to wake up one morning and nothing's going to work because you don't have any electricity. It's going to get shut off. So that's the best analogy that I can think of. You don't default. You avoid default at all costs because of the cataclysmic consequences. What makes Tea Partiers so dangerous, and this is why I actually prefer, in this way, I actually prefer Trump to Joe Walsh, is Joe Walsh, as a Tea Party Republican, in theory, might think it's just fine and dandy for the U.S. government to default on our debt. And consequences be what they may. And Donald John Trump, for all the lampooning of him that we do on this show, for all the making fun of him that we do, for all the ridiculing of him that we do, and I haven't even gotten to the using nuclear weapons on hurricanes thing yet today. Despite all of that, look, I give credit where it's due. It doesn't matter how prone I am to relentlessly criticizing someone. If someone's right about something, they're right about something. And once in a while, I'll help find something. I don't find too many things, but I'll find something to give them credit for. And because this is an issue that I care very much about, and again, the debt limit, it's not on anyone's list of top 5 or even top 10 issues in this country, but it should be, because we came very perilously close to a total catastrophe in 2011 when Obama and the Republicans were negotiating that budget. We came perilously close to disaster. I mean, we were on the edge of disaster. It ruined my summer. I'm not even kidding when I tell you that. The summer of 2011, I was very worried that economic global Armageddon was about to take place. That's how serious it was. But on this issue, we have a president who apparently gets it. It almost sounds funny to say it that way, right? Because it seems like there's so much stuff that you look at him and you go, I don't think he gets what he's talking about, right? But he gets it. He said recently, in fact, they've got the debt limit squared away for another 2 years in that last budget deal. He said, Trump himself said flat out, yeah, the debt limit. I mean, he's awkward with language, so he referred to it as a sacred thing. I don't know if I would have used the word sacred. That's an odd choice of words, but it's Trump. He's locked in this ongoing jujitsu match with the English language. So, but he's right. I mean, the words may be awkward, but the spirit of what he's saying is correct when he said it's a sacred thing and we can't risk it and we shouldn't be negotiating with it. He's 100% right about that. It used to be not questioned at all. You don't mess with the debt limit because it is too dangerous. It is the ultimate third rail. You don't mess with it. And then in 2011, that changed. But Trump, to his credit, he's got that right. He's got people around him like Steve Mnuchin who've got that right. They get it. They understand it. And by the way, I think probably most Republicans sitting in Congress also understand it. But you had this wave of Tea Party Republicans who, man, I can't get into these people's heads. I've never understood. Are some of them, I mean, Joe Walsh doesn't seem like a dumb guy, but are some of these people so unsophisticated they literally don't understand the difference between the budget and the debt limit? They actually literally believe they're the same thing and can't. I mean, and granted, there were some of these Tea Partiers who did seem a little like that. What's his name? That Farenthold guy from Texas. He ended up having to resign in disgrace because of sexual harassment. What was his first name? I can't remember. His last name was Farenthold. This congressman from Texas. He was one of these Tea Party guys. And I don't know. I can't even think of a politically correct way to say what I want to say. So I'm just not going to say it. But sometime if you're bored, go on YouTube, type in Farenthold, Texas congressman, and watch him on television, and you'll get it. He was a little different. Let's put it that way. Now, having said all that, Joe Walsh, I did find a clip. It's really short. I don't think I'll bother to play it, but I did find a clip of him on some show talking about the debt limit where he didn't come right out and say, clearly he had some media training, which is probably why he was eventually able to get a talk show. Because he didn't come right out and say, yeah, I think it's okay to default on our debt. He kind of tried to get cute with it, like some of these Tea Partiers did, like where they would say, well, if we hit that deadline and we don't have a deal to raise the debt limit, it'll be okay. Somehow it just works. You know what? I do want to play the clip. For some reason, I'll pull it up really quick. I'm sorry, you guys, but this is important. I just want everyone to understand who this guy really is, because there will inevitably be people. I don't think there's going to be many, but there will inevitably be somebody out there, one of these rare unicorns, one of these rare Republicans who actually doesn't necessarily think Trump is the greatest thing to ever happen to the country, who will get excited and say, oh, cool, there's somebody other than Bill Weld actually challenging Trump. This isn't the guy for the job. I just want you to understand that. Like, you might be a Republican who is, maybe you're a never Trumper, or maybe you're just someone who, you've got some Trump fatigue going on. Again, I know there's very few of you. Most Republicans I know are deeply in love with Donald John Trump. It is remarkable. I talk about it all the time on the show. I don't know any Republicans who simply like Trump. They love him. It's incredible. But if you are one of those very, very rare unicorns who are looking for someone else to hitch your wagon to, some other Republican, this ain't the guy, is what I'm saying. Let me play this quickly. Now, this is Joe Walsh trying to get cute with this debt limit thing. This is from 2011. I just want you to understand why he's dangerous. I mean, there's other things about him that make him dangerous, by the way. But this is the one thing that I look at and say, I think Trump is less dangerous than this guy, because at least Trump might find other ways to drive the economy into a ditch, like with this trade war nonsense, but at least he gets the debt limit. Now, so this is Joe Walsh on CBS News on July 28th, 2011, in the midst of all this dealing and negotiating over the debt limit.
One of the Tea Party Republicans who's taking a very hard line on taxes, spending, and the debt limit. Congressman Joe Walsh of Illinois is with us. Sir, good morning.
Hi, Erica. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you here. Speaker Boehner, we heard you some very strong terms yesterday and said essentially to Republicans, it is time to get in line. So will you get in line with Speaker Boehner, and will you vote for his plan today?
Today we discussed with our
I give my speaker, Erica, a lot of credit because they've been working this hard. And in reality, they've sort of been the only ones in town working on this problem for weeks. Look, we came here in Washington to change the way this town does business. I think these troublesome freshmen and a lot of the House Republican rank and file have had a great impact on changing the debate. But we're so obsessed, Erica, with August 2nd. I think what's important is that we get this right, and neither plan right now does that, though I understand the Speaker's plan is a step in the right direction.
So then just to stop you there, 2 points. You say it's important to get this right, so you're okay with a potential default on August 2nd. You would let that date pass.
Now, that's an important moment. So she's asking him, so you're okay with default? This is Erica Hill from CBS. So she's asking Joe Walsh, so you're okay with default then, is what you're saying. Now, listen to what he does, because you'll hear it.
Erica, default's not an option. And look, the administration knows that.
Well, yeah, right. Default's not an option. Okay, good, but
most people in your profession should know that. We've got plenty of government revenues in the month of August to service our debt. Default isn't even on the table. Let's make sure we get this right. And if that means going to August 3rd or August 6th, let's do a real solution.
Well, then
he's wrong. See, yeah, default's not an option, and that it's pretty much the worst idea ever. Okay, good. But then he's trying to, get cute with it by saying, look, we have enough money to, even if we don't raise the debt limit, we'll still have enough money coming in to cover everything, right? So don't worry about it. But that doesn't make sense, right? A child could figure out that doesn't make any sense. Because if that were the case, then why would the debt limit be an issue to begin with, and why would you have to raise it? Oh, no, there's plenty of money. Don't worry. We're not going to default if we don't raise the limit. So then she sort of feebly attempts an actual act of journalism and presses him on it.
Part of the issue, though, which has been brought up a number of times, is the debts are $306, $307 billion, depending on how you look at it. The money that would be coming in without raising the debt limit would be $172 billion. So clearly there's a shortfall there, and not everything could get paid.
Right, exactly.
How is that not a default?
So then she asks him that. So then he responds with this.
Well, Erica, what we know is the government's going to bring in a couple $100 billion in revenues this month. We know it's about $29 billion to service your debt. So there's revenue to service the debt. There's also revenue to take care of Social Security and military benefits. Look, there have been reports that this administration privately, in private conversations...
So there you go. So he just turns around and hands her the same word salad, just with the vegetables arranged slightly differently. There's money for this, there's money for that. Don't worry about it. But there's not enough. If you have, again, to use the electric bill analogy, if your electric bill's, $100, you only have $50, well, that's great. You have $50 to put toward the electric bill, but you don't have enough to pay the whole bill. So, and when you're talking about the federal debt, I'm sorry, but it's not as simple as just calling the electric company and seeing if you can make a payment arrangement. Doesn't quite work that way. So anyway, I don't want to play the rest of the clip. Again, just for anyone who's looking to hitch your wagon to this guy, just understand that he's got some real problems. And there's something else about him we might have to save for tomorrow. We're already almost out of time today. Look, but let me say this, too. He's going to flame out really fast. I am fascinated by this, and I'm not even being critical when I say this. Because, it probably should be done. But I'm fascinated by this movement that seems to be happening with these Republicans who do want to try to challenge Trump in some way. First, of course, Blake Farenthold. Thank you, Fred. Oh, and Mike Doyle, I did get your email. I'll read that in a second. Thank you. I'm fascinated by these Republicans, this movement of Republicans. And I think Bill Weld was really the first one, right? The first one to get in, who want to challenge Trump, try to primary him. And history tells us you can actually sort of try to be a threat to an incumbent president. It's very hard, but the first election I could ever vote in, I still remember vividly, 1992, Pat Buchanan virtually tied with the incumbent George H.W. Bush here in the New Hampshire primary. Pretty amazing. Well, 90, well, that would have been, because it was in January. So, 92. Nearly beat him. I think it was a statistical tie. But here's the thing. So you got Bill Weld. Now you got Joe Walsh jumping in. Two very different guys. Bill Weld is someone I've always liked. I'm as someone who's kind of moderate in my politics. When Bill Weld was governor of Massachusetts, I used to always say, that guy is about as liberal as you can be and still get away with calling yourself a Republican. You know what I mean? Like if there's a line, he's right at that line. So I always kind of like that about him. Just a true centrist. He could probably just as easily pass for a conservative Democrat in the South as he could a liberal Republican in the Northeast. And then you've got kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you got a Tea Party guy like Joe Walsh, who, also we're not going to have time to get to it today, but he has a history of some racist comments. And I give Joe Walsh credit. Joe Walsh, I will give him credit for this. in terms of his racist comments in the past, he's owning that and apologizing for it instead of trying to sort of obfuscate and, excuse it and say, oh, I was taken out of context or whatever. He's biting the bullet on that, and I do give him credit for that, sincerely. Because some people don't apologize for anything ever. And yes, I am referring to our president, right? So Joe Walsh is actually apologizing and he's owning it. But here's the thing. It's all a big suicide mission for these guys. I respect them for having the guts to do it. But I keep seeing Anthony Scaramouche, and I like the mooch. I find him oddly fascinating. But, he's not running, but he's trying to put together this coalition of Republicans who are going to challenge Trump because he's saying Trump is non compos mentis at this point. And he seems to feel very confident that he can get something together to really challenge the president. But it's a suicide mission. Republicans love this president. You can try to talk yourself into all you want to this idea that there's all this dissatisfaction with Trump within the Republican Party. I'm telling you, yeah, I have no doubt that probably the majority of the Republicans on Capitol Hill hate Donald John Trump. And he is an albatross around their necks. I have no doubt. But voters, sitting here in New Hampshire, looking at that rally at the Snooze Center, plus the thousands of people who couldn't even get in because they're so deeply in love with this president. They are fooling themselves. They're delusional. The theory about Anthony Scaramucci that I keep hearing, and I think it might be true, is that because Anthony Scaramucci is no conservative. He is, by his own admission, a social liberal. He's a New York liberal, but right of center on economic issues, which he comes right out and says it too. He doesn't. To his credit, he doesn't try to get cute with it. He says it flat out. He's a social liberal and a fiscal conservative. The theory about him is he's trying to really kind of work his way back in with everybody in New York because there's so much antipathy toward Trump in New York City. And in the financial sector, there's so much antipathy toward him. They all hate him. He's trying to work his way back in with them. And that's why he's spending all of his time in the Hamptons trying to hobnob with those people. That's the theory about him, that he's really just in it for himself. And that's why he does come off a little thirsty, to use a term I hear the young people say. We'll get into all of this more tomorrow because I am fascinated by it. But it's going to have zero effect in the end. Trump will be the nominee, and I still think, and I'm sticking by this, my prediction at this moment, and it's a prediction. I've been wrong before. I didn't think Trump would win the election. It's just a prediction, but that's part of the fun and what's interesting about politics. I still predict Trump will win re-election, and I predict that he will lose the popular vote again. It'll be a repeat of last time. He will lose the popular vote again in 2020, but he'll still carry all the same states because of the incredible loyalty that Trump supporters have for him. There is nothing this man can ever do that will dampen the loyalty of Trump supporters.